Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. Oh, should we sit down here? I'm not going to get in the way. Thank you for coming to Cinema Café. My name is John Nein. I'm one of the senior programmers here. I would love for you to look at our overall program. We have some great stuff coming up tomorrow here at Cinema Café. We have Ethan Hawke and Rupert Everett, who are both directing films at the festival. Wednesday, we have a surprise guest. I'm not allowed to tell you who it is, but I can give you my personal assurance that you're going to want to be here. It's going to be very cool. The whole idea of Cinema Café is we pair people in unexpected but interesting ways. Our two guests here are two people who I think have completely reimagined how we tell stories. They've both been to Sundance in the past in various capacities. Miranda July with her films Me and You and Everyone We Know, The Future. She's also been a lab fellow, and she is here as an actor in the film Madeline's Madeline, which is in our next section. Ira Glass has also been here with past projects when he turned This American Life into a TV show, Sleepwalk with Me, and he is here as the producer of a wonderful film that premiered last night called Come Sunday. So this is our partnership, Cinema Café with Times Talks, a great partnership that we've had for a number of years. And I want to throw it over to my colleague, Michelle Gray, who is the creative director of Times Talks.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure for Times Talks to be collaborating with Cinema Café once again, and for our partnership with Sundance as a whole. For those of you who aren't familiar with Times Talks, it's the New York Times Live Conversation series that pairs Times journalists with the brightest and boldest creative minds from theatre, music, art, literature, fashion, and of course, film. It's a pleasure to be here, and moderating today's conversation is one of the New York Times' favorite contributing writers, Logan Hill, who, as I mentioned yesterday, is at his 15th Sundance Festival. So I will let him take it from here. Thank you.
Yeah, I've learned things like drink a lot of water, like take the ibuprofen ahead before you need it, talk to strangers on the bus. Do you have any Sundance tips for like the people who are going to be here for a few more days?
I've been taking a lot of CBD oil.
What is that?
That's like, it has no THC, but it's like a hemp derivative. You can get it on Amazon. It's like a legal thing. I just figure it's good for a lot of things, and it is good for headaches, and like you can get altitude headaches really easily. What are you doing?
Nothing. I'm doing nothing.
Really?
I'm wearing exactly the same clothes I wore in New York, and treating this as if I'm just in New York, but it's hilly.
It's hilly. Okay.
And Miranda, you're acting, but you're in a film that you didn't create and build from the ground up. How does it feel?
Super relaxed right now. I've never been here and not like had to premiere and sell a movie, very high stakes feelings usually, and I'm just having a good time, and I'm so proud. I'm here for Josephine Decker, the director of Madeline's Madeline, and I'm just a huge fan of hers. So I am here for the same reason that I did the movie, which is just to hang out with her.
And Ira, since you're on the opposite side of this thing, you're sort of responsible for making this film happen. Do you feel a crushing sense of stress and pressure, knowing that now everyone's watching this film? It played incredibly well last night, but how are you feeling?
Yes, I am feeling a lot of stress and pressure. Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, and mostly, I've been to Sundance 3 times, and every single time my experience has been we've had a film to promote or something to promote, and then I see no movies, and then just go from like one press thing to another and repeat the same things over and over at each one in a way that I feel weird about.
Yeah, no, I can't wait to hear you.
Yeah, that's all
I know.
you do.
Yeah.
How about we'll make a deal? If I ask you a question and you feel like you just only have the canned response, we'll just skip it.
Okay.
We'll move right past it.
Or I will try to modify the canned response to give you something.
I'd appreciate that.
Okay.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Perhaps I will say the opposite of what I usually say. Okay.
But actually, these are two of my favorite films of the festival that I've seen so far, and they couldn't be more different. And I have an advantage on Miranda that I've actually seen Madeline's Madeline.
Yeah, it premieres at 3,
Mm-hmm.
so I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we do, we'll show you a little clip to give you a little taste of it.
Okay.
And would you like to tell folks, just set the film up a little bit, tell them a little bit about what you're doing?
Well, in this film is about a young woman, Madeline, who's involved in a sort of experimental theater production that draws very much on her own experience. And Josephine was really interested in kind of outing all these messy creative things, like, you know, does creativity, is it supersede all sorts of other kinds of moral responsibilities? Whose story is it? You know, if you're telling a young girl's story, like, is that cool? Like, and she was doing that to some degree, and that's very much interrogated within the movie. And I play that girl's mother, and things get she's quite violent. I do remember getting burned by an iron and having my hair ripped out, but I'm violent too. And I mean, it's, I remember as watching all the people saying, like, God, Lady Bird, it's so intense, like they're fighting, but it's real. That's really how mother and daughters are. And I was like, okay, whoa, we're like, we're so far past I think probably the relatable mother-daughter, but maybe not. I mean, maybe it can be taken one step further as far as how passionate that relationship can be.
This is like Lady Bird Fury Road or something. I mean, it is very intense. But we'll show you a clip, and this is from a session. The lead actress, we should say, who's wonderful, is Helena Howard.
So incredible. I mean, to me, I am also here to just like watch her break out. Yeah. Like, she is a phenomenon. Yeah. Although, is she even in this clip? I hope. I don't know. This is when I haven't seen this, but I think it's when I'm sort of like an annoying mom, kind of becoming part of her acting class, and the teacher's sort of luring me in, and she's like, yes, come try it with us. And I'm like, I've never done this before. Yeah. Is that true? Okay.
Let's take a look. Talking about how intense it is, and then we give them this beautiful, gentle clip.
I think that's the calmest part of it. Yeah.
Would you like to talk? I mean, I feel like for folks who haven't seen Josephine Decker's "Thou Was Mild and Lovely" or "Butter on the Latch," would you like to talk about what about her work brought you this? You don't act for just anybody. You rarely act in other people's work.
I do occasionally some someone will have the bright idea, like, what about Miranda July for this kooky girl role of this artist girl? And that's never appealing to me, to play some version of myself. And in Josephine's case, well, I had just watched all her work because she actually approached, through my agent, she approached me to adapt my novel, The First Bad Man. And I looked at all her work because of that, and I remember thinking, like, wow, I must not want that novel adapted, because if anyone could do it, this woman could. Like, and her stuff was just so weird and interesting, and me and Mike both kind of fanned out on her, and it's just unusual filmmaking, like where you just couldn't figure out the process really, and the way she shot it, and clearly the process was different from what I do. And so then some months later, when she reached out through friends about this part, I actually had set aside, I had these 2 weeks that I had set aside just to write. I'm getting ready to make a movie, and I was finishing the script. And the time she asked me to act was in those 2 weeks, and I thought, you could either go sit alone and write, which you know how to do, or you could go sit and watch this other director direct, because a lot of acting is just sitting, watching other things happen, and be directed by her. And which one would be better for you as a director? Like, clearly, to sit on the set of a young genius. And so that was, in a totally greedy, self-serving way, how I made that decision. It was like a thing you just don't get to do that as a director, see someone else's process. And I remember leaving when we finished and going immediately and writing a list of all the things I had learned from her, from a person working totally differently from me, all the things I learned that I wanted to remember before shooting again. Like, it was like gold to me, that process. And acting for real, like not acting lines I'd written, was the funnest thing in the world. Like, I was very scared before, but then it was, I loved it, and I understood that it was fine that I wasn't acting in my next movie, because I wanted people who were as, lost in the world of their character as I was when I was doing this. That distinction became very clear for me. Yeah.
Well, before we move on, I want to ask you again, what's on that list?
I know, it's on my phone, which is over in the green room. I think I remember describing it to someone as, because I didn't intimately really understand acting in the usual sense, it was as if someone was doing higher math, fancy higher math, without ever having learned how to count to 10. Just didn't even know what 1 was. I didn't understand the basic unit of measurement of filmmaking. That's how I felt. I mean, obviously I've figured out some things, but I felt on a very limbic brain level that I understood the material better, and how to protect an actor better, and how to set them free, and that was everything. That you had to let go of some things. Because I'm a writer, I come from this, I'm super controlling and editing, and I am editing. It's not that fun to be edited as an actor, and so realizing you sacrifice your exact vision for this other thing that is as good. It's just not, you don't always get the exact thing that you had in your mind. And I will never be like her, and she'll never be like me, but we've gotten so much from each other. Yeah, it's now just a great friendship. Yeah.
I mean, one of the reasons I'm interested in talking to both of you is moved through so many different sorts of projects, and film is become a bigger and bigger interest of yours with This American Life.
Yeah.
So Mike Birbiglia's films, Sleep With Me and Don't Think Twice, were the most recent two. You've got other things in the works. Do you want to talk a little bit about how this film comes out? It comes out of the episode Heretics.
Yeah.
And gives the little backstory of how Come Sunday was made.
I mean, this is a story about a minister named Carlton Pearson who was kind of at the height of everything he'd wanted. He had created this huge mega church in Tulsa, which was where they had black people and white people attending together, which is super, excuse me, which is super rare in any church in America. And he was Oral Roberts' protege, and he was super ambitious. He had created this music festival called Azusa, which was like the gospel music South by Southwest. He was being considered as like a Republican candidate. Like that was a thing that's not in the film, but it was just a real thing. And God reveals to him that you can get to heaven even if you don't believe in Jesus. And he starts to preach it, and basically his whole life just falls apart. And it was interesting to us, like as on the radio, because it, like I've felt for a really long time that one of the worst covered groups in America by journalism is people who have faith. I feel like generally the way that reporters come into their world is almost like anthropologists, and often they're portrayed in very cartoonish ways, and very little documentation of like the lived emotional experience of what it means to have faith in America, and especially the evangelical movement. Like I'm thinking about the people who I've known and been close to who are evangelicals or grew up evangelical. They're so different than the corny portrayal. And there was like a period on the radio show where we were just very interested in doing all sorts of stories about people, on Christians. Like we're in this Christian country, and I'm not Christian. It's just super interesting to me, and because I just felt like it was just like a whole area that just wasn't being documented. It just seemed like an area for reporting, and then people don't make mainstream movies that try to capture that accurately either, or TV shows. Like there are a few, but like not much, and it just seemed exciting to try to do, and it seemed, and so that was really the impetus, and the premise of it was the entire thing would be inside their world, and that the people who argue against the minister, the real life minister, Bishop Carlton Pearson, you know, like they aren't arguing against him from kind of a doctrinaire, like dumb point of view. They're arguing against him like these are people who love him. And they're like, brother, we would like to believe, you know, that there's no hell, but like it's not in the book. Like we wish it were in the book, but we don't see it in the book. And he's a biblical scholar, and he's sort of like, well, the Bible actually says kind of both things, and so it's a little ambiguous. Let's talk about that, but people don't want to hear that. And it just seemed, I don't know, and the fact that like people are reaching out to him with love. Like we don't want you, who we love, to go to hell. We don't want you to take your family to hell. We don't want you to be leading like these people in our congregation to hell. Like we're just like worried. And it just seemed like a drama you just don't see, you know, like, and the fact that it all really happened, and it just seemed exciting to make into a film. And then there was the horrible process of making it into a film, which is so awful, and I don't know how people do it. I don't know. It's just like a study in delay gratification at a level that I just cannot comprehend. Like how do you people do it? Like what, like, I mean, I know.
It's just awful, I know.
Like we spent 7 years, you know, like trying to like, you know, there's like drafts of scripts and they don't work at first, but then they kind of work, and then you're just like finding somebody who's going to give you all this money for a movie with an all black cast and about religion. And I kept talking to like studio heads, and they would say like, look, I don't know much about Christianity. They would say, but like, you want us to put millions of dollars into a movie that says that anybody can get into heaven and there is no hell. I don't know what effect that's going to have on America, but we just don't want to get like picketed or something. And I'll be like, no, everybody gets fair, like, but like it's just like, it was so outside the world of the studio system. Yeah.
Was there this question too of This American Life as sort of a producing brand, you know, or as a show that people know and love. This being obviously your biggest production so far. Chiwetel Ejiofor gives this huge performance.
Martin
the first
Sheen.
scene is in this massive mega church. You've got hundreds of extras. It's if you've seen the Birbiglia films, for instance, this is a level of scale that's just
No,
different.
the Birbiglia films were basically filmed for like $45, yeah, compared to this, yeah.
Were some of the producers looking at like kind of was there a discussion of this being a sort of, or is there something fun about making this your planting a flagpole with this film in such a big way as a way of announcing the kind of films that This American Life will be making?
I mean, we teamed up with people at a company called Endgame who were used to making much bigger films than this. Like, we understood we were not experts at that, and they were wonderful. And so like we, so nobody ever raised that question because we tried to like circumvent it by getting in people who were used to this kind of production. Yeah. I don't know what else we're gonna do. Like, we're in a situation where there's a bunch of stuff in development, including our other podcast, Serial and S-Town, both people have been trying to develop those into films. And
what's the difficulty? Is part of the difficulty there just that they worked so well in their original medium?
Yeah, like they're designed as podcasts. Like, figuring out how to do Serial again as a film is a really tricky project. And should it be a film or should it be a miniseries? And is there a Sarah Koenig character? And like, I've honestly stayed out of it. I don't even know what stage it's at. I guess I could have inquired before talking about it in public. And and S-Town the same thing. Like S-Town is really designed as something that unfolds over time, and certain things are revealed over time, and your picture of the main character changes so radically. And I know that there was a talk about doing it as a little miniseries or as a film, and where the creators want to do it right now is as a film. Like, it just seemed like a more interesting challenge. So they wouldn't be remaking the podcast. They worried that if it was going to be a miniseries, you could so easily do a segment that matches this segment of the radio show or the podcast. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of doing a full disclosure. I had the pleasure of doing a This American Life story a number of years ago called Just South of the Unicorns. But I remember, like everyone who Googles you, the first thing that pops up is this video you do talking about creativity, which has sort of been like reinterpreted a million different ways. This audio where you're talking about the gap between sort of this idea that you love and you're obsessed with art and you develop good taste, and there's this gap between your taste and your ability.
Yeah.
And then after doing things over and over and over again, you get a little bit closer. So I want to ask about that in the sense of sort of what room does that leave for being an amateur, sort of moving into a new space? Like, you're suddenly a dancer, or you're doing stage show, you're a stage performer. And I know, Miranda, you've talked a lot about sort of being inspired by sort of the Riot Grrrl movement and this idea that like you don't necessarily need to be the most technically proficient, or at least for a while in your career, very interested in this idea that there's something of value to the rawness and the amateurness of some of the projects. Do you see a tension there, like as you move into things you haven't done before?
For sure, yeah. Like, I feel like some of the projects, like I did tour for 3 years in a dance show, where I would tell stories and dancers would dance, and then sometimes I would dance with them, and the choreographer really loved it because she's like, you don't dance like a dancer, you're not good enough. You dance like a human being who is trying to express himself through dance, and she's like, that's so much more interesting than actual watching people who are perfect, and so she made that the product, kind of the imperfection. Like the fact that it was not that good or not good, but could do moves, but not well, but with a lot of heart, was actually like the thing that made the statement. So yeah, like I think there's totally space for that. Like I think like for me, it's more like it took me like from a decade of my life to even learn how to express myself well. You know what I mean? I feel so I feel like the next thing I go into as an amateur, like I feel like and at least now I understand how to harness something I'm feeling or want to say and push it into something, even if my chops aren't good.
Yeah, you're very, very eloquent. Thanks.
I mean, yeah, as someone who transitions between so many different mediums, you go from writing to your films to performances. Is there how do you get the confidence to kind of take on the new project, or be okay with the fact that you might not, that there will be a learning curve with each of the new things that you do?
I remember watching that video of yours, the one about like there's this gap between, and actually being like, I see how this is useful, but this is not for me to think about. Like I feel like my way growing up and growing into being an artist and a writer, and when I head into a new medium even now, is to not be aware of the gap, to be sort of like you're sort of blessed, at least the first time, by that unawareness, and you have instead a kind of boldness, which can be off-putting and arrogant and naive, but it also is like newness, like you, along with all your mistakes comes a new mind or a new approach to this medium, and that's fine. I can see it's like if people get frustrated, you're sort of reassuring them if they're frustrated.
No, it's more
Okay.
like I think I wasn't as talented as you, and I was bad. I was not good for a really long time, and so I feel like that's the thing I learned of like I was just. It wasn't like I was bringing in a kind of freshness. I was just not good. And I think that the people who've embraced that video are people who are like, they're making stuff, but they know it's not as good as they want. Like for me, that was like a decade of my life of like, I know I'm making radio stories. They aren't what I want. They aren't as good as other people's stories, and they aren't what I have in my head. And I didn't know. So I think it's like, it's intended for a different, less talented user than you.
Well, I mean, I don't buy that totally. I mean, I will say this is reminding me of I started this project when I was 21 called Joni for Jackie, and it was essentially just a call for women and girls to send me their short movies, and I would compile them into groups of 10 and send them back VHS tapes so we could see each other's work, because there was no YouTube, and you felt very alone if you were a woman filmmaker. And this was sort of, I started this before I started making movies, so it was my way of creating a context for myself. But a big premise of that project was we accepted all movies. I mean, the sad thing about that is there just has to not be very many movies in existence, and there weren't many movies made by women, so I could do that. And just the process of them finding me and me finding them was difficult enough. But the idea behind not having like a talent or merit-based criterion for which movies were accepted was the idea that any conceptions of talent that even I came up with would be based on a whole history of cinema that is in fact the very thing that we were trying to get out from underneath. So it was very important for me to think, well, I don't know why this woman made this movie, and to not assume that she was trying to get to Hollywood or to Sundance, but to think, like, maybe she made it to save her fucking life on some level. Maybe she felt like, if I don't get this feeling out, I don't know what I'm gonna do. And therefore, to look at that tape and be like, well, it kind of sucks. I mean, like, it's just not very good, and like the sound, and it's sort of repetitive, and she ranting, what's she doing there? And, it's like to instead take it and say, like, no, I'm not comparing this to even Jane Campion. Like, I'm deciding that this is allowed to exist in its own framework, and I was trying to create that framework within which that made sense.
Well, that's
so
also, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess that would be my sort of counterpoint to the gap. I think both are we've got you covered, young people.
Well, this is the discussion I was hoping to have, because I did notice this difference in the way that you talk about your art, and I love this. I found this quote where you're talking about Joni for Jackie, and you talk about how Riot Girl permitted us to pick up guitars, sing about our lives with passion that made mastery irrelevant. Could the same thing be done with movies? My pamphlet emphasized that every single movie would be accepted. I didn't care about discovering talent. This wasn't Sundance or Hollywood or any of that old school crap. But I do think that's, I mean, this was a time, even when you did make it to Sundance, with me and you and everyone you know, I think there were only 2 films by women directors that year.
Yeah, in competition. And I came straight out of that, out of Joni for Jackie. And when people said, like, who are you? You know, it wasn't like from LA, like, how did you make this movie? How did you have the confidence in a way that, I was like, well, in my mind, because I'd been running this project for 10 years, I was not a minority. I was surrounded by women making movies. And so coming to Sundance, and it wasn't just Sundance, obviously, a whole industry, was kind of like, oh, right, and this is actually why I did that I kind of forgot that. Like, I didn't fix it, as it turns out. And in fact, my confidence went steadily down from there. Yeah.
This year, you should say 37% of the films are directed by women.
Yeah, no, it is a big improvement. Yeah.
And I'm curious with both of you, given all the reporting the Times has done in particular on the culture industries and the sort of harassment of women in the workplace, the lack of opportunity, Harvey, and public radio and the art world, how is it changing the way you're seeing, say, for instance, the path forward at This American Life? Obviously, there have been a ton of women doing really important work at This American Life for a long time, but how does it change the way you see the business?
Wait, the question is, how does it change how I see the business?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, were you aware, for instance, of like the amount of harassment that's been reported, so not at This American Life, but at other public radio networks?
No, I wasn't at all.
Yeah.
But talking to the women on staff, some of them knew. Like, some of them knew people at different public radio stations who knew some of what was going on. And some of it was just like not the sexual harassment part, but just like male radio hosts just being total dicks when they got off the air. And like one host in particular who had heard on the air, it was explained to be like, no, like kind of like he was often just like loudly berating young women and telling them they were idiots. And which I didn't know. Like our show is kind of an independent little company by itself now, and I had never seen that when I was at NPR in Washington. And it's like and like there've been like 3 or 4 people now who have been outed as being like that, and it's such a weird opposite of what public radio is on the air. Like, if you think about those male hosts on the air, they're playing like the most reasonable, like they're talking to you in that like reasonable NPR voice, and the thought that like the second the microphone goes off, they're like abusing some like 25-year-old production assistant and yelling at her, like that's the weird flip side of that like nicey NPR voice seems so like psychological and like dark and disturbing. And weirdly funny too. So no, I didn't know about that. And just in terms of our business, like it's always been like, for a long time it was more women than men. Public radio traditionally always had more women than men because it paid less than commercial broadcasting. And so you'd have women anchors and women, correspondence and things very early, like in the 70s and 80s. I don't know if that's a complete answer, but.
And Miranda, I know when all of this news was breaking, you sort of tweeted out at one point like, well, wow, like it's nice that people are finally understanding what we've known since we were 7 years old. It's a little bit exhausting. I think at a certain point when all story after story was breaking, given the amount of activism you've done around women in filmmaking and the arts, how have you been feeling reading these story after story?
I mean, for the most part, sometimes I have a moment like just disbelief, like I never thought this would happen. Like I just assumed my whole life this was just how life was. And it's not, for me, in this position of power, it's not so bad, but it definitely is like, there's never been an age where I didn't feel it. There's been very few circumstances where it wasn't at play. I mean, I've been recounting me and another actress were like reviewing an interaction we had with a director when we were both in our 20s, and we were like, oh yeah, that was like textbook, you know, assault. And we were kind of like, not assault, but like really real line crossing, you know. And we were, you know, to look at things through this frame, you know, and realize also like we are all practicing it. I'm not saying we're all complicit, that word, but like it's not like now we have a new way of looking at women, and it's like now we really just see you for your heart and who you really are, and how you look, that doesn't matter anymore. And it's like this soul level we're at now since Me Too. You know, that is not what happened. What happened is now people are just too afraid to harass you because of their own jobs. Like it really has to do with them, you know. So it's a little bit, you're caught in between. It's not actually what, like this very baby steps beginning thing is a great beginning. I mean, it's breathtaking to me, not nuanced in the least, let's not pretend. I mean, it's just like machete cutting through the culture. But so powerful, and I'm interested to see, I think it'll be generations and generations before a true, like, spiritual matriarchy that me and the women that I know are living within, and how we're relating to each other. Like, just for the level of the culture to get up to the level of a lunch between two women, you know? Like, the amount of, like, seeing and intimacy and listening and complexity that happens there at some dumb cafe. Like, that's like the goal, I would say. And then everything that flowers from there. Yeah. But this is really, you know, let's hang in there, because I think that it's not pretty, but this is, you know, one of the few great things that's happened recently. Yeah.
I know you've got lots of questions, so we're going to pass around a microphone. If you raise your hand, we'll get one to you. How about right up here in the front? Hold on 1 second, we'll get a microphone to you. It's coming down the center. She's going to turn to the right.
Thanks. Hi, I'm so excited to be here. Miranda, I've watched you since Gilman Street, Yo-Yo A Go-Go. I've read every one of your books. The novel made me cry. The commentary in Future made me cry. You have some of my videotapes. I was in your show in the Netherlands. You chose my art to be in that show for Learning to Love You More. I worked with Harold at the Wyberg. Anyway, I love you. I've watched you develop, and I just can't say how exciting it is for artists to live in the fringe and have a political fire, to watch you rise as you have and affect so many other people's lives in such a positive way. Your art is incredible. My question is, I'm sorry, that's the beginning part. My question is,
I loved it.
Having started with such, I don't want to say humble, but you were on the street.
Now she's going to go for your throat. Watch out.
I saw
She's just warming her up for the slaughter. I've seen this before. Okay, hold on.
Have you been able to keep hold of your truth? I mean, have you been able to follow your vision? Now that we're here at Sundance, you know, and we're not in Berkeley, at Gilman Street at a punk club.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, the truth is, like, practice really works. I would say, actually, it's easier now. I mean, it turns out I never I never took a distracting offer, you know? I mean, one thing is I just really have, you know, I'm not wealthy. I'm like, I stuck to a certain kind of thing that was just my own work. And I think maybe early on, like certainly the first time I came here, there were a lot of kind of paths it's offered, you know, as it is their job to do that. And I think those were moments where I had to think like, you know, this seems like a very privileged thing to turn down, you know, like a first look deal or whatever, but I don't know how to trust anything other than just going home and working on my short stories and trying to like finish that collection, you know, like I have to stick to what I know. And now, I mean, I'm 43. It's now been so long that I sometimes actually, like even doing this movie, I sometimes have to push myself out of my thing more consciously after all those years of trying to, you know, take care of my thing and not get, you know, pulled into someone else's sphere. Like Josephine's movie was really like a case of like, this is not yours. You will not be in control. You could not like this. You could, you know, this could be a waste of time. You have to leave your son, you know, who's like 3 or something. Like, it felt very wrong. In fact, I quit the week before. And yet, so for me now, in a way, the practice of continuing to, you know, stay true to that sort of flame within is also about just realizing like it's stronger than that. It's not going to get messed up if you're out of your swirl, you know, like it's looser than that. The world is has a certain energy, and you can like trust yourself and go into it. So I feel like I'm doing that more. Yes,
another
but
question?
thank you.
Right here on the aisle.
Thank you. I'll make this real quick. I'm a big fan of the Just South of the Unicorns. It's one of my favorites. In fact, my mom lives minutes away from Floral City, Florida. So that's where the story takes place. But then not far from there...
That's the story you did for This American Life.
Yes, yes. But not far from there, in Beverly Hills, Florida, I've met Johnny Depp's dad. And the only thing I could think when I met him was like, he's the progenitor of the guy who did the voice of the man with spinal muscular atrophy for the episode of This American Life. So I was like...
Yes, Johnny Depp's voice was on one of our TV shows, but you know, he's done so much other work.
I've heard. So
like, obviously that was an important break for him.
Yeah. But to keep my question short...
Too late. It's too late for that.
But obviously, This American Life has been in various formats, you know, live theater and musical theater. But what do you think of VR and AR and, you know, mixed reality? Have you thought that maybe This American Life could expand into that realm?
I've looked at that stuff. Like, I've seen demos of all that stuff. I'm not sure what story we would tell. Like you know, I'd be most interested in doing more reporting. Like right now, it seems actually more exciting to be documenting what's really happening in our country than making up stories for me. And so like I can't imagine. Like, I've even seen some of the interesting journalism people have tried to do with VR, and I feel like if I could think of something to do with it, I would. But like I feel like I'm only making stuff that I'm excited about, so I haven't yet to cross into that.
Thank you. Another question? Right there. We'll get you a microphone first, please.
So it's mainly comments both of you made about the Me Too movement and coming out and people being a dick. I'm a physician, and I've witnessed in multiple prestigious institutions very well-known physicians in a room with a patient who are incredibly caring and wonderful and walk out and berate the medical assistant who's 22, 23 years old, making minimum wage, throwing pens at them. So the Me Too movement transcends gender, transcends socioeconomics, it transcends profession. And there are standards that everyone should uphold in their jobs. And I just wanted to make that comment.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
But we've only got a little bit of time left, so if we could keep the next question shorter than the other ones, that would be great. Does anyone right here in the front row?
Ira, every time we hear This American Life, we see the story playing out in our head visually like a film. And we all have our favorites that we'd love to see as a film. Can you reveal any of the episodes that are maybe you're considering for development as films?
I don't know. I can't remember what stage they're at in the announcement process. I mean, I know for sure Serial and S-Town were trying to. Your story was going to be made into a film by Chris Weiss for a while, but then that kind of went away.
Like 99% of all film things. Just
Right, and then it might be
It's
another.
just you.
Yeah, so I don't have any exciting things to share with you on this. Sorry.
Right here.
So one of my favorite quotes is, I don't remember who said it, but it's the difference between fact and fiction is people expect fiction to make sense. So I guess my question for both of you as storytellers is, how do you wade through the insanity that is reality to find a story that people aren't going to, like you were saying, people weren't really accepting the story as far as telling it? There's things that I've encountered in my own life that if I went to make a documentary about it, people would be like, you're making this up. There's no way there's a guy running a cult and moving people to Belize. It just sounds crazy. But how do you kind of wade through that to tell a story without seeming like there's no way this could be happening or whatever?
By the way, I was in that cult.
Wait, and this is a documentary story you're making, or it's a fiction thing you're making?
Story.
It's a true story,
It's
but you're
just
making
a life right now.
Oh, I see. But you're thinking about making a documentary or a feature,
A documentary.
a documentary.
Yeah. How do you tell a story without seeming like you're nuts, or you're fabricating something to be interesting?
I mean, you just have to. Honestly, you have to use the tools of a fiction writer. You have to figure out who's at the center of the story, and what their story arc is. I feel like even the words I'm saying, I feel a little corny saying about, or what feels wrong to say about real people. But it's just understanding what really happened, and then finding the parts of it that other people could be able to invest emotionally in. I feel like it's honestly, I think so much about the beginnings of things, about what do you say at the very beginning of a story? What's the first beat or two of a story? What's the moment where you try to get the audience to actually have a feeling and invest in the person who the story is about, and all the ways you can do that. And I think understanding what is appealing about the story to yourself, and I feel like as soon as you lock into other people's real feelings, then they'll just go with you.
Another question. Anybody standing in the back want to do a question? I feel bad for you guys. Nope? Okay, we'll do right here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
To piggyback off of what you were saying of those offers that you've been turning down, has either of you actually landed in that situation where you've taken a very good offer because of your status and then found yourself, oh no, this is compromising my artistic integrity? And how do you get out of that or fix that?
That's not a big problem in my life. I don't. Do you have an experience to show?
No.
I want to hear about your experience. How much was it?
Okay, last question. We'll get a last quick question right here. We'll get you a microphone. And thanks for carrying the microphone around. You've been running around so much.
Who is it?
In the back here.
God.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Further, go. Go deep.
Ira, this one's for you. I'm curious, as we all know, and I'm sure no one knows this better than you, Hollywood's favorite tool is adaptation, right? And in talking about podcasts like S-Town or Serial, wanting to adapt those into film or TV space, I guess I'm curious, what do you feel could be added to these stories by telling them visually? I mean, they're such incredible podcasts on their own. Like, why make it a movie?
Me?
Not that it couldn't be good, but like, why bother?
Often people want to adapt things, and I ask myself that question, and I feel the answer is nothing. I just feel like, and I feel like as a radio producer, I just feel like we nailed it. There's just nothing else to do. There's no other feelings that you could extract from this. But honestly, like some of the filmmakers who we talk to are like, they really do have a picture of doing something with it that seems really cool. Like there's a director who's been talking to us about doing S-Town like as a play, and he thinks the most interesting thing is that you have Macklemore at the center of it, and he's like, and everybody has a different sense of who he is, and he's like, well, what if that guy isn't even on stage? Like, what if he's played by several different people, or what if all we hear is his real voice and everything else is acting? And he just like, it was such a set of like interesting sort of stoner approaches to it. You know what I mean? Like I was like, that seems sort of exciting. Like it just seemed like it's just somebody who, like the most exciting version is if somebody comes with like kind of a radically new vision that would get at some new feelings or some new thing, and that always seems cool. But generally, no. I just feel like why tell the story again? Honestly, like, I'm somebody like I never saw the play Hairspray because I was like, I saw the movie, I loved the movie. Like I don't need to see that story again. You know what I mean? Like I'm personally like not, you know.
And adaptation is kind of how you met Josephine. You were saying that she was interested in adapting your novel, right?
That's true. Yeah. And I think there is a feeling of like, well, I did it really well in the medium I chose. I think for me it was also confusing because I myself could have turned it into a movie, you know? So I'm like, I think an author who doesn't have anything to do with directing is kind of like, that seems fun, go for it, you know? How much do I make? Like, whereas to me, I'd be like, it would just be really confusing. Yeah, and that book actually was adapted into a stage production, The First Bad Man. It's a big German play. It's been running for months.
Is it good?
I haven't yet seen it, but it got great reviews in German.
So you've been told.
Yeah, right? Yeah. I mean, I can't. That just seemed so far removed. I was like, knock yourselves out. I mean.
Well, folks, this is our last Time Talks partnership with Sundance here this week. There's lots more going on here, but I just want to thank everyone for coming, especially the team that puts these events together. They've been so great, and Michelle Gray, our creative director, John Nein, the folks from Sundance, and especially you two for closing it out on such a high note. The films are Come Sunday and Madeline's Madeline, the two of my favorites of the festival, so go see them.